that's fine. The ministry tightrope, balancing church and family. We're going to begin with true confession time. I think my main qualification for giving this lesson is that I identify with this struggle. And that is the extent of it. At one time, I was trying to balance church, family, graduate school, and teaching college part-time. I do not think that that is balancing well. I think it's a little bit on the crazy side. And I do not recommend it. So I hope, though, in my struggle, to offer help for you in the process. You know, work-life balance has become this new catchphrase in the business community. Everybody's talking about work-life balance, even while they're taking money from you and giving you more to do. But if we talk about work-life balance, then we ease the pressure, I suppose. And whether that's due to economic pressure or from the goodness of their hearts, employers are realizing that family life affects work life and vice versa. Preaching is no exception to this, though there are some things that are very different and distinct about it. The work of a gospel preacher comes with a unique set of challenges. And I want to list some of those for you. For the students, I hope you're beginning to realize it. For those of you who've been doing this for a while, it will not surprise you. But maybe for some people, you haven't thought about it. First of all, preachers are always on call. That's not the only profession that's true of, but truly, preachers are always on call. Anything can happen at any time. Now, thankfully, it doesn't have to be that way all the time. Not every week is like that. But at any moment, everything can change because you're needed. That's the nature of ministry. Preachers also, though this is changing, live in close proximity to their work, making that a little bit more difficult to get out of the mind sometimes, especially as for 20 years, for my instance, living right next door to the building, it's always right there. It's right with you. It's so close, you can feel it when you sleep. Preachers are often expected to attend most, if not all, church activities. As part of the ministry, that's part of your job. And so we load up our calendar, and now where's the preacher? Well, many of those things are in the evenings or on Saturdays, and that takes family time away. It's a challenge. Preachers deal with very emotional issues in crisis situations as part of a normal routine, which can leave them emotionally spent when they get home, and it's just as much a factor as all these other things. Preachers experience multiple disruptions to their work. We like to call them people. Sometimes on a daily basis, but that is the work. The work is people. And therefore, the nature of that disruption just goes with it. Preachers regularly have additional work added to their plate at a moment's notice. But you're not going to complain about the fact you got a funeral. There are other people that have a lot greater problems on their hands. But it's extra work. A Bible study comes up. That's a good problem to have, but it's extra work. Someone's life has been changed and they're dealing with problems. You need to do counseling. It's extra work. Preachers often travel to preach elsewhere or do mission trips, leaving their families at home, which is never easy, and it's sometimes a very real problem. So I think you get the idea. Individually, these are not necessarily an issue, each individual one. They're all understandable within the collective, the context of the work. And most of them are just the nature of the work itself. But collectively, they spell burden, or they can. And it can be a burden not just for the preacher, it can be a burden for the family. It drains the preacher's energy and it can take time away. And in fact, these things often create health problems due to the stress and social expectations of the job. A lot of preachers are introverts, and all the social stuff just takes as much out of them as anything else. But it's important to appreciate certain advantages preachers now. I want you to understand we are not here to complain and have a pity party. there are some advantages too. Preachers often have the shortest commute in the congregation. I got to thinking about this, and I believe that it takes me longer to walk from my office upstairs over here to the offices here than it did to take throughout my lifetime to walk from my house to the office. That's a short commute. I mean, I had to go through Sonic to get there, but it was still very short. Preachers have more control over their daily schedule than almost any other occupation, which means that if you do it right, work can be very efficient. And that's important to learn. Also, preachers can do their work practically anywhere, which is both a blessing and a curse. But there's one more intangible challenge we need to admit, that the very nature of preaching combines work life with spiritual life itself. It's the nature of the beast. They are so intertwined that they are impossible to untangle for anyone who truly puts his heart into it. The truth is that a good gospel preacher puts his heart into his marriage, his heart into his children, and his heart into the congregation. And that's why walking this tightrope is so challenging. After all, great men of God have failed miserably at home. Aaron had Nadab and Abihu. Eli's sons were a problem not just for Eli, but for the nation. And David's problems at home were multitudinous, varied, and tremendous. Modern day examples, though, I'd say are just as plentiful. Balancing church and family as a preacher, that's tough. And that's why we need to prepare for it and then deal with it. I think sometimes our approach has been to act in denial of these things. And so we end up putting up walls that make us ineffective in either place. So as I go through and I want to give you 7 basic principles, and that's all they are, because how you have to implement these will vary depending upon your situation. But I want it to be something that you can apply and that you'll take seriously. First of all, then, we're going to walk this tightrope. Be realistic. It does you no good to start off by trying to be so idealistic about, here's how it's going to be, and I'm going to set this up, and I'll have all this time, and it'll be fine. I'll get this done. My sermons, I know how long it takes me to do a sermon. This is a 10-hour sermon. This is a 15-hour sermon. This is a five-hour class right here. I've got it all timed out on my line, and here's all my family time. And if we think that's how it's going to work, we are in for a rude awakening. You need to learn to be realistic. In Exodus 18, and I think this is a good text just for us to consider as for everything moving forward. I want you to notice this. We're just going to read verses 13 through 18. They are at Sinai, and Moses' family has joined him after his work in Egypt. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit, and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another, and I make known the statutes of God and his laws." Does that sound familiar, guys? So Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you do is not good. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you. You are not able to perform it yourself." That was a reality check for Moses, and he needed it. And so do we. I tend to overload my schedule, making plans as if this week will be the perfect week. Everything I can get in, I know what it takes, and so everything, I just throw it in there. And then ultimately, the end of the week comes, I haven't gotten that in, so now I've got to push all those things down, and you know what happens? It just starts building up later on. And at the end, when you get done, you're putting things off, which is a negative. It comes up again, you say, I can't possibly do that. Now you're feeling guilty. None of that's healthy because you're being unrealistic from the very beginning. Preachers, your role in the church is important, but you can't and shouldn't do everything. In 1 Corinthians 3, verse 6, I want to remind you this just in principle. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. Preachers get themselves into trouble when they're trying to get in the increasing business, instead of making sure they're planting and watering and understanding their own limitations. You can overextend yourself as a preacher. It can lead to burnout. You can hurt your family. You will keep other people from growing by doing everything. They need opportunities. Also, you need to be realistic and accept that you're going to disappoint some people. You cannot make everybody happy. So don't try. You need to make God happy. And that means you're doing the absolute best for the congregation, for your family, in pleasing Him. But that means you disappoint them for the right reasons, the right priorities, without letting that rule your life or your heart. Now think about it this way. Jesus disappointed many Jews because He wasn't the type of Messiah they wanted, but He chose God's will. He was the type of Messiah God wanted, and that's what we need to think of as our model. You're going to make mistakes. Be realistic. You're not going to be a perfect preacher. So don't try. Don't try to put up that false image. The spirit is willing, I know, but the flesh is weak. So let's admit that part too. Matthew 26, verse 41. You can still do things right and learn from your mistakes. Don't allow yourself to get focused on one problem, on one day or 1 week, so that you cannot see the big picture of ministry. You need to be realistic and schedule your time accordingly. If you end the week and you've gotten everything done in 35 hours that you needed to do, first of all, please call and tell me. And then go spend 5 additional hours with your family and don't feel guilty about it. Second of all, be creative. Be creative. You need to learn to work with things as they are and come up with neat, creative ways to make sure you're doing both. You know, the great benefit of the overlap between the work of a preacher and daily life of a Christian is that you can include your family in things that you're doing that are Christian things to do, that they need to be doing anyway. Now, I want to add this. Don't treat your family as slaves to your work. You know, hood ornaments on your life, that's not what we're looking for here. But involve them as part of their Christianity. Your family can be a great partner with you in that work, but you have to be creative about how you do it. When you do it right, home life, work life, don't have to compete. They can complement. And that's a key idea. Don't get where they're competing with one another. Make them complement. When you're together, do things together and blend those things. For example, take your wife or your children with you on visits. Matthew 25, 35 through 40. You know, it's always amazing to me because people will engage with my wife and my children on a visit. They're just really great at it. It takes all sorts of pressure off me, but there's a nice point. The preacher's coming, and it's got, okay, you've done your due. But the family's there, you love them. And so that's a real benefit. They can be part of that. Include them in Bible studies as they grow older, your children. Teach your children how to be the silent partner in a Bible study. Let them be part of that. They can watch people's children while you're studying with them. They can do things that serve and be evangelistic. Mark 16, verse 15. When there is counseling to be done, especially when you're dealing with couples, wife that's wise is invaluable in helping in those situations. Sometimes just being there, certainly when there's just the woman is there, that the wife is there, that she can have her counseling as well, but also that sometimes there needs to be some time apart and some practical advice given that maybe is going to sound a lot different coming from her than from me. Very important. Pray together. Show hospitality. These are all things we can do as Christians, and yet you can do together as a family. If you go into a mindset to say, we're going to serve one another here. We're going to serve one another as we serve in the Word. Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, that through love we serve one another. You can use time away. Let's take, when the preacher has to go somewhere, that's a time when the family can use, we've got a little bit extra time. Dad's not taking all our time. What can we do? We can make some cards. We can do our own thing. We can serve. We can use that time that is productive and makes us think of things in there are also, I call, special projects. When your husband's away, wives, that is special project time. Now, if you want to talk to someone that actually understands this, you need to talk to my wife, not me. Because it's always, the neat little thing is, when I go somewhere, what will my wife find to do and have accomplished when I get back home? She has put up shelves that needed to be put up and arranged something just amazing. Last time, I think it was, she found a way to get movers to move something that we had not been able to get upstairs, and she found a way to make it happen. And if you haven't been in her house yet, it's kind of an awkward way going up the staircase. She found a way to get it done while I was gone. It's a project, and it's helpful, it's supporting, and it shows she's thinking about you and doing things. Okay? Just take care of the home. That's a great service. Take time with members of your family as part of your work when possible. I want to, when Mike was speaking earlier and talking about don't turn take your vacations, I'm talking about in addition to just vacations. Okay? I remember going with my dad when he went on a couple of tours of gospel meetings. He took just me along growing up. That was our time, and that was special. There was a time a few years ago that I had a back-to-back lectureship and gospel meeting in the Northeast. Now, it was impractical to pay for the extra plane tickets, so I took my family with me. And we had that time, but we vacationed in between time so that they had their time as well as the work time. That's additional beyond vacation time. Why? Because you're making sure that they're part of your work, but they also have their own time and their own special. So you use those and be creative about it. You're always going to have times in which that's impossible. You're not going to be able to include them. It ought to always be on your mind of figuring out a way if possible, though. Have your family always in your mind. Thirdly, be present. I think this is a struggle for all of us. This one is the one I think that I still work on, and it's hard. But I want you to think about Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. There's a responsibility to that. It's in the home. You can look at also on what he told husbands in Ephesians 5. But it is amazing how much interaction we have in today's world while still not really being there. We are there, but we are not there. And while that is true of digital communication, it's amazing that we can have this communication. We're not actually in one another's presence, but we can communicate. But I'm talking about when we're in one another's presence, but we're not really there. And that can be an issue. You're a husband, a father, and then a preacher. And you need to make sure that that is in evidence. So be present in your family's life. A lot of ways you can do this. Take the kids to school on the way to the building. You can work that into your schedule to find ways to help the family, and run by Walmart on the way home to help your wife. Plan to be there for those soccer games as much as possible, or the piano recitals. Have family devotionals. Share yourself with them in that way. Pray with your wife and children. But also be present by being available. A preacher can take a moment to handle a family crisis. You know, if you're at the building and something comes up, you shouldn't ever be so busy that you cannot take a phone call from your wife when she really needs something. Something's gone on. If it's important enough for her to think that she needs you, then she needs you. Be present for her there. You know, you can also, because of your schedule, you can stay home with the kids or take them with you to the office on occasion. Make a way, make it work. You can be present. Also be present by not overscheduling, and I admit that's one of my personal challenges. But I want you to think about it this way. You can be gone too many evenings doing Bible studies and say, well, I'm doing the Lord's work. Yeah, but where about your children? Where are you staying with your children? When are you around your children? You need to guard that time. Is it true that some people, that's the only time they can do Bible studies? Yes. That's also sometimes the only time you're going to be around your children. You can be gone too often on mission trips. One of those things that my travel schedule haven't had to deal with before, but I have to deal with it now. To gospel meetings, camps, lectureships, it doesn't matter what it is, things that take you away, you either find a way to include or you need to find a way to deal with that absence. Also, give your family preacher time too. Let them benefit from your background. I don't mean, sometimes I think members, when I say give them preacher time, that you've got your own little pulpit at the house, and you just stand up and address the family. I'm talking about, they could learn things from you if you would teach them the right way. But when we're also talking about being present, be present when you are in their presence. And that means unplug, put the phone down. I get messages all the time, and you know what? I want you to think about something. When's the last time you actually turned this thing off? You don't have to anymore. So we don't. And to just put it down, leave it in the pocket. I get reminders constantly of everything going on. And I'm going to tell you, one thing I'm going to find is that do not disturb, because I'm with family. Make eye contact. We talk about it in the pulpit, right, guys? Eye contact. How about eye contact with your wife when you're talking to her? And then do talk and communicate. We've become very super efficient at so many things, and we've learned to multitask at various levels. By the way, multitasking, we fool ourselves. Multitasking actually means doing several things at once poorly. That's kind of what multitasking means. It means I have an inability to concentrate on any one thing, but I'm doing a lot of things, so that makes it okay. Well, think about if that's how we've treated the family, that they're one of those things I'm multitasking. That's one of the challenges. We need to make sure we don't lose in the process the ability to give attention to the people we love. Let's fix that. Fourthly, be flexible. You've got to be flexible. Why? Because life is constantly changing, the work is constantly changing, and home life is constantly changing. As the kids get older, everything shifts in terms of what they need and what time is and what they're doing and what you need to do, and you have to be flexible. The same thing is true in a congregation. The same thing is true in a marriage. James chapter 4, verse 14, that whole idea of you don't know what's going to happen, guess what? That's life. That's home life. There have been a number of people, I get a message, actually, I think I've had 2 or 3 just today. This came up, I'm sorry, I've got to go. You do not know what's going to happen. So that means you cannot expect everything to simply fit into some predetermined slot on your calendar. You have to be flexible. You have to learn to roll with the punches. And the family does too. The family has to learn that some of these things happen. It's not because Dad wanted it to happen, it's that it happened and he's having to respond to it. So what does that mean? Something very hard. Expect unexpected challenges. Someone might pass away unexpectedly right before you're going to leave on vacation. If possible, you put that leaving off to serve the family. Yeah. A church member might have an unexpected crisis during the holidays. Do you tell them, I'm sorry, I'm enjoying a turkey dinner right now, I don't think I can come help? Or you help? Someone you've been working on for months may finally be ready for a study, but it's on your date night. These things happen. So don't panic when things don't go as planned. That doesn't mean it's wrong. The unexpected in life is actually normal. Things come up in the life of a preacher all the time that he cannot avoid, and that usually means that people in need can't control it either. So it's not about blaming someone. It's not about having to blame. It's about just simply realizing the nature of life. So, when life gives you lemons, make chocolate cake. I know that's not how the saying actually goes, but my point is that sometimes you have to go a totally different direction you originally planned. Do the first thing that has to be done in that circumstance, and then the next thing until you get through it. Gutting your way through in the survival mode is essential, and it's actually a huge success once you're through it, and you will have to learn to do that. There are going to be times in which you are going to be overloaded, and your only task at that moment is just to do what needs to be done. And that's a challenge for the whole family. The key is that love never disappears, and that everyone can appreciate this is not normal, and we are serving, and we're helping people, and we're doing our best to please God. So, be flexible when it comes to vacations, holidays, and yes, even date night. You need to have all of these. But your date night does not have to be on Thursday night when someone else's life is falling apart. You can move it. It's okay. It does not mean you don't love one another. So know what constitutes a crisis worthy of immediate attention and when someone is just wanting attention. Those are two very different things. And know how to respond. Be flexible as a preacher and help your family learn to be flexible by giving them your all and a little more when they've experienced a disruption. So once we get past those disruptions, let's take a moment and really focus on family. Let's say thank you so much and say a real thank you. You've been real troopers through this. I know I've not been able to be there for you. We're going to take some time just to reset our normal so that there's never going to be any doubt that there is love there, there is care there. And elders, please take note of this as well. Fifthly, be consistent. But we're going to apply this in a very specific way. Jesus said, and I'll give this in principle, Matthew 5, verse 37, that you let your yes be yes and your no be no. He's talking about having such a character in your speech that once you say it, that's how it is. You're not having to add anything to it. That's the context. Sometimes preachers can run hot or cold, either with work or with family. They're all gangbusters for work for a while, and they realize they've been neglecting the family. Then they're all Mr. Family Time, and then the work gets neglected. So they go back and forth, and they ping-pong through it. And they end up taking turns feeling passionate about the one and guilty for the other. That's not healthy. All or nothing for one or the other is just a bad idea. We need to be balanced, and that demands consistency in our approach. Because the fact is now that you can overcorrect. You can overcorrect and make the mistake of being super dad but poor preacher. The Lord's church does not support you, guys, to be wonder husband and super dad. That's not why they're helping you. They're needing someone to help them. Now, we recognize a Christian responsibility, but you need to recognize, too, that your role is preacher in work. And you need to be a Christian dad and a Christian husband. And not think that you can just take that free time and give a soft serving to the congregation so you can give everything that matters to your family. You need to be consistent with both. Ministry cannot take a back seat to your family any more than your family should take a back seat to ministry. We've got to learn to have balance of both of them in our lives, and that means you have to learn how to carry both responsibilities simultaneously, or you're not really taking responsibility at all. If we're just taking one and we take one, set it aside, and walk with the other for a while, and then we neglect that. We're just in a pattern of neglect. We're not really learning responsibility. To think about this, in Matthew 4, 18 through 19, we find Peter being called, follow me. He says, I will make you fishers of men. Did Peter follow? Yes, he did. What do we find in Mark 1, though? Jesus shows up, and they're in the home, and he's there to heal Peter's mother-in-law. Now, what does that tell us? It tells us that Peter had not turned his back on his family when he followed Jesus. There was still a family life that went on to some degree. He was finding a place for balance, and that's what we need to look at trying to do. Be consistent in following a plan to build the right expectations for family members and members of the congregation. So save certain evenings for ministry and certain evenings for family. You may have to switch the nights when necessary, but you save them and you limit it. Take time off that fits your family schedule. You know, what good does it do if you're always taking time off, but it doesn't fit when your family needs you to be there? Take it away that it helps them. You also need to make sure you protect your family from work intrusion from the very beginning. They are to be a faithful working Christian, not the whole workforce for the congregation. And I think sometimes, guys, you get out and you're in a small congregation and not a whole lot going on, and you want to try to get things going, and all of a sudden that family becomes the only workers. And we burn them out on their Christianity. You need to protect them from that, because that's not good for the congregation either. Figure out your priorities and your plan from the beginning, and then be consistent with it. Now, you may have to make some adjustments here and there, and changing circumstances, congregations changing needs. But in principle, build balance into your life, not just your preaching. You need balance in both. Because people need to see a really good, functioning Christian man who's a Christian husband and a Christian father, who is working as a Christian and is not just someone that gets up and knows the book. That needs to be there too. But we need to see that whole. And that leads us to number 6, be focused. Colossians 3, 1 and 2. Focus of a Christian: if you've been risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. Set your affections, or heart, things you care about, things above, not on things on the earth. You know, sometimes we can let circumstances and problems lead in our lives. Isn't that easy to do as ministry? What gets the attention? Problem. Squeaky wheel. I sometimes say on this is that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and when what it sometimes needs is a good swift kick. We need to make sure that we're not letting that problem lead too much. Because when that happens, we're just responding to trouble from all the time and running from fire to fire. To maintain balance, we need to be focused. So think about how we do this. Focus on the important, not the urgent. You need to have a list you keep in your mind, if nowhere else, of things that really are important, and your family better make that list and be high on it. Your Christianity, your life, and I will include your health on there. Things that are important, because urgent things tend to run congregations down. And there's an important sign, I'll admit I've not been brave enough to put up in my office at any time. But the fact that someone, you ever seen one of those places where they talk about it, where just because your failure to prepare does not create an urgent need on my part? Now, there are certainly things that just come up that no one can control. But we need to carve out space and realize that we need to be focused on things that are truly, if you're going to do it like an emergency, make sure it's really an emergency. Because otherwise you're handing control over to your life, over to your work, your family, over to everybody else. Be focused on what really matters. Problems and people have a way of making themselves seem bigger than they actually are. I want you to think about it in 1 Kings 19. What happened, and Elijah had a big problem. He just had this big success, but now the problem is someone wants to kill him. Now that's a big problem. And he's on the run. And he's going away. And when God finally gets him to slow down and stop for a second, his complaint is, I alone am left. And he has to be told, no, you're not. No, you're not. It's not as bad as you think. Sometimes issues and problems, they make themselves appear because they just get right in your windshield. And they seem bigger than they actually are. So focus on those things. Focus on what God says you should do, not on what everyone else would like you to do. That doesn't mean you can't throw some things in and you're wanting to try to help people out. But the important things are the thing God wants. Make sure those are there. In your preaching, in your teaching, in your work, in your relationships. Also, focus on your strengths, not your weaknesses. That doesn't mean you don't need to be working on things you're poor at. But focus on your strengths. You're always going to be better if you're staying in your strength and then growing and overcoming weaknesses through your strengths. If all you're doing all your time is saying, I'm really poor at this, I need to give all my attention to it, you know what happens? You cease to have any strengths. That means then you need to know yourself as an individual, as a preacher, as a husband, as a father. You need to be aware of your own personality. Why do I feel this way? Why is this getting to me? Why does this person really annoy me? You need to know your personality. Know your wife's personality and what can help her. Your children's personalities, what they respond to. And then ultimately try to get your members. But you need to make sure that you stay in your area of strength and realize there are other places that people can help. There are elders that can do things. You can show people the way. There can be counselors you need to take. That's too big for me. I'll get somebody else to handle that problem. No, I'm not very good at it. This person really is good. Let's bring someone in as a speaker that will address that because that's not really something I can do. There are all sorts of ways that we can bring people in to help instead of trying to be the super all, which we can't ever be. When something is a weakness that's still a godly expectation, then you focus on how you use your strength to bring someone else in to help you overcome your weakness. But realize what your strengths are. And then focus on maintaining proper boundaries. Take some time to do an inventory of where your boundaries lie in every aspect of life. And when somebody crosses a boundary with your family, your wife, or your work, keep a margin in your life that can absorb emergencies and crises. Have that space. Don't be living on that edge so much that any extra thing's just going to throw everything off. Keep margin so that you can work with it. You know, if you don't understand what I'm saying about this, one of the things I noticed when I went to South Africa, driving in Cape Town, South Africa, is like driving in downtown Dallas at rush hour, only with smaller lanes. The lanes are more narrow. And you don't have that room to give any space. Well, the nature of what we have when you have a car in that lane is you've got a little wiggle room there. You hit a bump and you move over, you've got that space. Sometimes we're running on really narrow lanes in life, and anything throws us off and we end up a wreck. Know your own limitations and your family's so you do not push the limits unknowingly. Know what you can take. Know what your wife can take. Those are often two different things. You need to have enough love for your wife to kind of see where her pulse is beating and when she needs the break, even if you don't, and the children as well. Paying attention to where you are as a person, as a Christian, as a preacher, as a husband, and a father are all important. But that requires taking the time to notice them. Okay, number 7, be godly. Be godly. Titus chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. That's what this all should be about. The grace of God brings salvation that appeared unto all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, godly. You see, in our present age, we ought to be people that bring God up in others' minds by the way in which we live. Regardless of our role and what else may be required of us, we have an obligation to God and godliness first, and that includes our conduct in the home as well as in the church. Now, I think most congregations are very understanding. Most elders want you to spend time with your family and take care of your family. Most do not want you working 60 or 70 hours a week. Sometimes people do not understand how long some of your work takes. Now, that's true. But rare is the congregation that puts an unhealthy burden on the preacher just by the number of hours required. So just strive to be a godly man and lead a godly family that's active as Christians rather than trying to be super servant and take on that mentality. Make the church a mutual priority as a family and make sure your godliness begins in the home and works its way out from there. No preacher wants to save a multitude and lose his family. But that can happen. Sometimes due to a lack of balance on the ministry tightrope. There's so many things tugging at a preacher and his family. After all, if Satan cannot get to the preacher, the family is the next best target. Noah understood this. And while he was a preacher of righteousness for all the world before the flood, he saved only his family. But I'll also remind you, by saving his family, he also saved the world. So preachers, be realistic, be creative, be present, be flexible, be consistent, be focused, and be godly. Balancing church and family is not easy for the minister to do, but it is essential for the minister to do. You have 11 minutes for a break, and you have an opportunity to come back and hear David Lemons. Just a few moments. We're thankful so much you're here. Remember, if you have not already registered, please do so. The evaluation forms are in between on your flyers. So if you look at the handout, get your evaluation. Please turn those in. Help us out. Remember the display area over in the MPR. And we thank you so much, all members